Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a great pleasure to rise and take the spot that's been left by the National Party, who didn't take one of their calls on what is a very significant piece of legislation, the Telecommunications Interception Capability and Security Bill, a bill that the Labor Party strongly opposes, a bill that my colleagues, the previous Labor speakers, have outlined in great detail why we oppose it, starting with our leader David Cunliffe, Claire Curran, who's done enormous work in this area, the Honourable Phil Goff, and most recently Marion Street. And I want to follow those Labor speakers and just put on record again our concerns about both the content of this Telecommunications Interception Capability and Security Bill and also the process around this bill. Now, first of all, this bill is problematic because it has added to the previous legislation, the Telecommunications Interception Capability Act 2004, a significant new component to the title, that is of security. And what this bill is doing is facilitating the changes that the government pushed through under the GCSB bill. And that bill failed to provide enough protections for New Zealanders, and many people listening have followed both that bill and this bill very closely. The people who care about democracy, as my colleague the Honourable Marion Street has said, the people who actually care about civil liberties and about privacy have been following these bills very, very closely. So this bill also fails in that regard. It involves a major expansion of the government's powers over network providers and the information provided through them. And as the Honourable Marion Street has said, of course we're concerned, like other people, about security, but it has to be balanced, and this bill is not balanced, and it does not balance protections for people's privacy, and that is what is so concerning. It's also concerning that the bill gives ministers extraordinary powers, and given the behaviour of a number of ministers, and the Honourable Marion Street referred to the behaviour of the Honourable Paula Bennett, but there are other examples of bullying that has taken place by government ministers, we would be very concerned about ministers opposite having these extraordinary powers. So these powers are likely to increase the risk of incursions. It significantly increases the role of the GCSB overall and their role in decisions by network providers and the information that must be provided to them. And telecommunication companies are being required to make their networks interceptable and to consult with the GCSB on upgrades and technology suppliers. Now, again, the Honourable Marion Street in her recent contribution has talked about this government's dependence on big business and their continued cronyism and their continued selling of legislation. Well, actually, I mean, this one's actually been quite interesting because this bill was strongly opposed by the major telecommunications companies and the risks that it places on them in being able to continue to provide services in New Zealand. And of course, as we've just heard last night, the Minister actually backed down and issued an SOP to remove Clause 39 around requiring overseas companies to comply, which, you know, again, the government has, while they were putting issues onto big business that we didn't necessarily agree with, it's yet another example of them complying with the demands of business. But does this government actually listen to the concerns of New Zealanders, individual New Zealanders, as opposed to big business? And we think not. And there's so many examples of that. This is a government that is completely out of touch with the concerns of New Zealanders. And the government, the national-led government, is not concerned about New Zealanders' very rightful fear of incursions into their privacy, into them being spied upon. And of course, we also know that the bill is shoddy, it's poorly drafted, and the Select Committee in dealing with this, and I want to acknowledge and commend, in fact, to people the Labor Minority Report, which covers a lot of these issues, but powers and provisions were, in the Select Committee's word, not clear or too broad. Now, this is very important in a bill that actually has so much ability to undermine people's privacy, to have a select committee saying that the powers that were being given were not clear or too broad is extremely concerning. And so the select committee has made changes to try and limit and clarify powers and processes. But will there be further rushed changes from the Minister? Obviously there has been really poor drafting, pushing through legislation again, and this is not a good way to make law, and it's particularly not a good way to make law of such significance. So just to really, summarise, we are concerned that the balance between privacy and security has not been met in this legislation, that there is a significant expansion of powers, and that is always something that should be very, very carefully dealt with. And it is a companion measure to the GCSB bill, and this is something, as I've said earlier, that New Zealanders are worried about, that a lot of people are following. And I think that National underestimate that level of concern. So we have agreed with Internet New Zealand's submission, for example, that the challenge was to strike the appropriate balance between addressing national security concerns without introducing a permission-seeking process that is too involved and uncertain to incentivise network operators to innovate and to support a competitive telecommunications market. Now, other concerns that we've raised are the cost implications, and that's referring to submissions by several network operators. And the case for expansion of powers has not been made. And during the hearing of submissions, Labor members consistently asked submitters whether they considered there was a case for the expansion of powers in this bill to the GCSB and to ministers. Not one submitter agreed that there had been a case for the expansion of those powers. And the committee was not allowed to hear submissions from any of the surveillance agencies, including GCSB, SIS or New Zealand Police, outlining the case for increased interception powers or expanded powers in network design and build. And I think that's something that also is extremely troubling, that supposedly these agencies have reasons for wanting these expansion of powers. Well, surely to goodness, that should be on record, and surely to goodness, the Select Committee should be able to hear from them and question those agencies. And the fact that they were not able to is, I think, very concerning for our democracy. And as Marion Street also said, there are a number of pieces of legislation and acts of this government which, when you put them together, show a complete and utter disregard for our democracy. So, Mr Speaker, just to finalise, I am standing here along with my four former speakers to say that the Labor Party strongly opposes this bill, and we will continue to do so.
Members, this debate is concluded. The question is that the amendments recommended by the Law and Order Committee by majority be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Yes. Party votes called for. I'll ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
33 opposed.
Green Party.
13 opposed.
New Zealand First.
7 votes opposed.
Māori Party.
3 opposed.
Mana.
1 opposed.
Act New
1
Zealand.
in favour.
United
1 in
Future.
favour.
Brendan Horan.
1 opposed.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 61, the noes are 58. The amendments are agreed to. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Well, look, I won't. If you want to have a party vote, you must challenge me at the time, not when I'm ready to move on. A challenge to my ruling once I've announced the result, has to happen at the time. So a party vote's been called for, because in future I won't accept one. A party vote's been called for. Ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National?
59 in favour.
New Zealand Labour?
33 opposed.
Green Party?
13 opposed.
New Zealand First?
7 opposed.
Māori Party?
3 opposed.
Mana?
1 opposed.
Act New
1 in
Zealand?
favour.
United
1 in
Future?
favour.
Brendan Horan?
1 opposed.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 61, the noes are 58. The motion is agreed to.
Telecommunications Interception Capability and Security Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. Call on government orders of the day numbers 2 and 3.
Maritime Transport Amendment.